Welcome back to Light Talk, where our guests can be themselves and tell their own unique stories and experiences of the metaphysical world. If you have your own stories and would like to share, please email lighttalk423@gmail.com. And while you're at it, click on that like, share, and subscribe buttons. Well, let's welcome back Preston. Welcome back, Preston. Go ahead and tell a little bit about yourself, and let's talk about those UFOs.
Thank you, Dana. Yeah, thanks for having me back. We
Oh,
talked about out-of-body experiences last time, but
mhm.
what's really interesting is when I started having those experiences, I was starting to have UFO experiences as well. And this was all new for me because I came into all of this as a skeptic. I grew up as a skeptic, and that all changed in 1986. I'll never forget the exact day, actually. It was November 17, 1986. And I heard a report on the news. This was just a basic news story about a UFO sighting over Alaska. But it interested me because they showed this pilot, Captain Kenji Torochi. I know who he is now. Uh, he and his crew had seen this very large UFO over Alaska. This was a Japanese commercial airliner, a very large jet. And this craft, whatever it was, basically paced their plane for almost an hour. They actually requested a course change. It appeared on radar. There were other witnesses. So a pretty well verified case and certainly very well known now. Almost none of this was in the news report. It was very tongue in cheek, very
Oh,
joking, even skeptical, I would say. But they did show the pilot. And I thought, wow, look at this poor man. He thinks he saw a UFO. They're not real. He must be hallucinating or misperceiving or something. I thought to myself, he's going to lose his job over this because you're a pilot. You can't go saying you're seeing UFOs. And I found out I was right about that later. He did lose his job. He was grounded for some time. But couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought, why would he do this? There must have been a reason that he had the courage to step forward. Uh, and I remembered my older brother, Mark. There's 6 kids in our family, as I said, 3 older brothers, an older sister, and a younger sister. And I'm right there sandwiched at number 5. So there's a lot of us. And one day, my brother, I was probably 13 years old, so I'm guessing around 1978, he comes running into the house one evening, really excited. He says, I just saw a UFO. It was really low. It was, right above the telephone poles. And I remember just looking at him and shaking my head and like not listening. I wasn't interested. I didn't think they were real. And really, none of us listened. Poor Mark. I feel bad now because he was so excited. And we're like, shh, shut up, go away. UFOs aren't real. But now, years later, hearing this news report, I remember that. And so I pulled him aside a couple of days later. And I'm like, Mark, you think you saw a UFO, right? He's like, well, I know I saw one. I'm like, well, tell me what you think you saw. He's like, I know I saw one. He says, you sure you're ready to hear this? I'm like, well, yeah, tell me. Because he's looking at me like, are you going to be, okay with this?
right, right.
And he described this. I mean, it was an incredible sighting. He said basically that he was with his 2 friends, Phil and Greg, who I knew, and they had parked the Volkswagen microbus on this little hill, and they saw this object that they thought was a helicopter very briefly. They thought it was a helicopter, but it was 100 feet away. It wasn't making any sound, and there was no propellers, there was no tail. It was a disc, a classic flying saucer, little lights around it, a dome on top, totally silent. They're like, look, a UFO. So they chased it, and they ended up chasing this thing for about 15 minutes down Reseda Boulevard.
Wow,
It's amazing when
wow.
he's just telling me this. I'm like, well, he can't be misperceiving this. It's too close. He's clearly not lying. So I'm like, it's not a, I don't know what this could be. It's not a hallucination. There was 3 of them. So he's telling me all this.
Mhm.
It's like we actually passed other cars chasing it. It would wait for us almost playing a sort of cat and mouse game. They get real close to it and would dart ahead. And it did that several times until it just went right across the San Fernando Valley. This is Southern California.
Wow. Wow.
And they couldn't chase it anymore. It was many, many, many miles away. And
Yeah.
I'm looking at him kind of open mouth, like shaking my head. I'm like, Mark, I, I mean, I was speechless. He was like, you should talk to Phil and Greg, his friends who I knew. And he said, they'll confirm it. So I'm like, yeah, give me their number. And of course they did. They explained it even in slightly more details here and there. Each one had a slightly different perspective to it all,
Hmm.
but it was clearly a real sighting. And it kind of knocked me over. And I thought, maybe there is something to this. But I wasn't ready because it was starting to really up, upset me. I mean, I almost felt scandalized because this
Hmm.
wasn't being taught in schools.
Right.
This wasn't being taken seriously in the media. I started asking other people. Found out that my sister-in-law, well, soon to be sister-in-law, had a sighting over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base in Van Nuys, not far away. It was unexplained lights. She's explaining all of this. Watched it for a good period of time there. And she's like, listen, I have, my friend Adlai, he was there. If you want to talk to him, I'm sure he'd love to talk about it. He loves this subject. I'm like, okay, well, give me Adlai's number.
And bring him on the show.
I
Yeah,
don't
if
know
he's
anymore.
okay.
And my sister-in-law doesn't really like to talk about the subject for whatever reason.
Okay, no problem.
But it was interesting because it was just a few months after that she had an encounter with grays, gray aliens. Classic, short little guys,
Mm-hmm.
large heads, bald, big eyes,
Mm-hmm.
jumpsuits, the whole deal. She didn't tell me that right away. She kind of tested the waters with me first.
Wow.
But, then I found out I had two friends who had sightings. One had missing time. Later, I found out there were more friends actually. And I brought it up at work. I worked at a business office with 20 or 30 people. And the lady whose desk was right next to my, I adore her, really nice lady. Um, and she said, oh, yeah, me and my whole family saw a UFO. She described this little star-like light that was darting across the sky.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, you saw a helicopter. And she got upset with me. Like, no, Preston, this thing was hovering still, turning at right angles, going from one side of the sky to the other in seconds. And so she's explaining this to me when in walks Dorothy, another one of my coworkers, who I also adore. She's so funny, very outgoing. And she's like, UFOs? One followed me home from the library. I'm like, Dorothy, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah. I think she was like 12 years old. And this was
Wow.
back in the late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I think it could have been early 70s. I'd have to pin down the date. I have it somewhere. But she said that she and her friend Carol had exited the Pio Pico Library in Koreatown, part of LA, at precisely 9 p.m. because they stayed until it closed. And they were waiting for their mom to pick them up, her mom. And as they were waiting, they saw this star-like object drop down from the sky and hover over the telephone wires across the street. And it was a classic disc, silver, colored lights on it. No windows, no
Wow.
domes, nothing like that. And it was just sitting there.
Wow.
And they were, of course, stunned. And up drives Dorothy's mother. And they're like, Mom, Mom, look, look. And Dorothy's mother, also named Dorothy, freaks out. I interviewed all three of these people
Uh-huh.
later. She's like, get in the car, we're going home. They live 5 minutes from the library
Okay.
and drove home, and it followed them over their car, right over it. Kids were freaking out. And they run inside up to the second story and look out the window, and there's this disc right out, right across the street still. It followed them. It goes back and forth, back one more time, and darts up at a 45-degree angle, becoming a tiny little dot in the sky and disappears basically into outer space. And that's when Carol looked at the clock and it said 10:15.
Oh, a full hour.
Exactly. A little bit
Wow.
more even.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Wow.
She's like, Dorothy, it's 10:15. She was supposed to be home by 9:15. Well, she was in trouble and she did not want to go outside. She was scared,
Right?
naturally.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is what introduced me to UFOs. And I was buying books. That's the first thing I did. I'm like, I'm going to disprove it. I'm going to show them it's Swampcast. This can't be real. This can't be real. I was
Right.
beginning to panic a little bit because
Right.
it was obviously real.
Hmm.
And the books just confirmed that. And I found out that there were UFO organizations. That was a real shock. MUFON, Mutual UFO Network,
Uh-huh.
and several others, actually. I joined them all. I started attending UFO meetings. I became a MUFON field investigator. I took their test. It was quite difficult, but I did really well. I missed 2 questions
Oh, wow.
out of a couple of hundred. So,
Really? That's a big
yeah,
test.
yeah. And it
Wow.
had hard questions on photography and meteorology and, of course, UFOs and
Hmm.
all kinds of, science-based subjects.
Wow.
But so that, yeah, that was a difficult first year for me. I had to reevaluate everything. I ironically became more skeptical because I'd been lied to. And I confronted everyone who told me they'd seen a UFO. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? Don't you love me? They're like, yes, I do. But you would not have believed me, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, yeah, you're
Sure.
right.
Yeah.
So that's how it started for me. And yeah, that was the same time I started having out of body experiences. So you can imagine how unnerving and uprooting it
Oh,
must have been. It was a crazy time. I look back at
yeah.
it fondly now.
Yeah, I'm going through that crazy time right now, and I can imagine what you were going through. I mean, just things were happening for you. It hasn't quite happened for me yet. So I can just imagine the craziness you're going through
Yeah, and
at that point.
after hearing, then my sister-in-law says, "Well, I saw grays," and she describes them, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" If she describes, the thin neck and the thin body and
Hmm.
the jumpsuit, and she was going down the list. She's an artist. She's got an eidetic memory, a great eye for
Nice.
detail, and I could predict what she was going to say. She'd never heard of grays. She wasn't even calling them ETs. She's like, I don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't human. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a gray alien. She's like, oh my God, really? Yes.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah,
'Cause
I've had those in my room. I've been visited by the recently. Understanding now that it could have been the Ponti, if you've heard of them. The Ponti is a
I
I don't know
have,
if they're part of Grays or who they are, but they're very similar to them. And I was so excited because I just interviewed somebody that was right next to the Sandia Mountains. I just got back from New Mexico, and I got to see the Sandia Mountains. So
well,
I was like so excited, but I didn't get to see any. I didn't get to see any of them. Darn.
yeah, well, that's kind of how I felt at this point, after a year of this and amassing books, which I still have, as you can see behind me, some 2, 3, 400 books on just UFOs, but paranormal as well, because it's all connected.
It's all connected.
Yeah. But I wanted to see one. I was starting to lose my mind over this because it's one thing to read about them.
Mm-hmm.
It's even more exciting to talk to someone you love and trust and know they're not lying and have them describe seeing ETs or a
Uh-huh.
UFO. But it's not seeing one yourself. It's a completely different story. Because
Yeah.
what I had was a belief, but I didn't have knowledge. So my whole belief system had basically collapsed, and I was able to differentiate between, something you believe in and something you know. Uh, and I really needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
So I started, I would interview people and I started building a network from friends and friends of friends and coworkers and their friends. And I mean, if you we all know like 20, 30, 40 people, easy, right?
Right.
Well, they all have, 40 people they know. And
Right.
so I started building a very large network because I would ask each person, if you know anybody who's had an unexplained experience, please, I want to know. So I had a lot of people calling me. and I would interview them, and some of them were having experiences currently. So they would call me like, they came last night. There was a UFO. I'm like, can I come over? I want to sleep in your yard.
I don't need a bed, just the ground.
I
Yeah,
did that a couple of
exactly.
times
Yeah.
because
How exciting.
I wanted to see one so bad. And I started to see unexplained lights. And that was thrilling. I remember, this took a couple of years. But in 1992, I grew up in Topanga Canyon. This is a little community right outside of LA along the Southern California coast, located between Santa Monica and Malibu, which are both quite well known. Uh, but that's where I grew up. 8,000 people, a small community, very rural, no sidewalks, no street lights. There was nothing like that. It was pretty much a country community. But turned out it had a history of encounters. And I ended up writing a little article for the local newspaper from some of the people I interviewed. And the editor was thrilled. He's like, wow, this is amazing. I'm putting it on the cover. Oh my God.
Whoa.
Okay.
How exciting.
So I wrote this little article, and it was, that was in 1989 or so, 88, 89. It was in that December, January issue. And a couple of years later, the editor calls me up. He's like, we're having a wave of sightings. People are calling the newspaper, they're calling the police. There's something going on, and you need to investigate this. Because I was, of course, a MUFON field investigator. But it turned out like 4 people had called the police, 3 people had called the newspaper. Cars were being chased down the road, objects were hovering over people's houses. So I started calling everyone I knew who lived there. I actually got the phone book, and I called everyone I could find in Topanga, even though I didn't know them or not. And I put up,
Really?
yeah, I went to the police. I'm like, I'm a field investigator. Here's my credentials. Can you take my number and refer me cases? And they said, sure, we'd love to, because we don't handle UFO calls, and we get a lot of them.
Wow.
So I started getting calls from that, and I put up flyers. So this was a wave of sightings that involved, the entire range of the phenomena. Started on June 14th, 1992, when this wave came over and continued for 2 years. So I was really excited about this, and of course, driving through the canyon at night, hoping to see something, and I did. I was driving along, and I saw this big globe of white light. And I'm looking at it, and it's right over this mountain that's maybe a mile away. And I'm thinking to myself, that's a plane. I'm not going to fool myself. I've been fooled before. Because when a plane, a jet, is coming right at you, it's got a very big landing light that obscures the red light and the green light on the wings. And it just looks like a globe of light. And then it turns and you see it's a plane. And it's got the strobes and so forth. And I'm like, no, this is going to be a plane, but I'm keeping my eye on it. Because I didn't pull my car over, and I kind of should have, and I regret it now because as I'm watching this thing and driving, it's a mountain road, so you have to,
You have
pay
to watch.
attention.
Yeah. Right.
This thing blinked out. I watched it blink out, gone, and that was unusual.
Yes.
That was thrilling. I'm like, wow, okay, but I didn't see, it was ambiguous, just ambiguous enough that I couldn't pin it down. And I was impatient. I wanted something better. And I had a few of those.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was, let's see, July 5th, I'm thinking. It's after July 4th, 1992. I was at my brother and sister-in-law's house, Mark, and his wife, Christy. She had seen little blue beings, she told me, when she was a young girl. So I found out this is in my family. This is a phenomena that tracks certain family lines. And I had no idea that it was in my family, but it was.
Wow.
Because I found out later, nieces and nephews, and my sister, Valerie, had had some really close-up sightings and a missing time incident. So what happened was I was on July, I think it was July 5th, July 20th, it was around July, right? And I'm at my
Right.
brother's house in Woodland Hills, very densely populated community. It got late. I'm like, I gotta go home. think it was a Sunday, and I had to work the next day. So it was approaching midnight. I'm like, I got to go home. I would go over there and visit because they were both, they knew UFOs were real. They'd had experiences. So they were kind of helping me through all this and helping me to investigate all these cases and, just bouncing ideas off of them. I'd spent a lot of time there with them. And I'm driving home. I had just left their house and I was maybe 2 minutes away, coming around a hairpin corner, which is very steep, very sharp, and can't go fast. I was going maybe 3 miles an hour when I saw what I thought was a bird swooping towards my car from the right side and above. And I looked up thinking, well, that's not a bird. Maybe it's a firecracker because, 4th of July
Yeah.
wasn't a firecracker. And it came down right in front of my windshield. And I'm thinking, well, it's not a reflection. You don't jump to UFO. Witnesses,
Right.
generally speaking, don't immediately say, that's us. I mean, sometimes they do.
Yeah,
But
sometimes, I'm sure. Yeah.
usually they're trying to say, is that a helicopter? What is that? And that's what I was doing because your brain is trying to overlay an explanation,
Right.
and I couldn't do it because this was a little ball of light that was right in front of my windshield, no farther away than I am from my computer, right
Wow.
over the hood of the car, and it was about as big as bigger than a golf ball, smaller than a tennis ball. So, you like a ping pong ball, kind of. I mean, about pretty small and yellow, well, white yellow, and hard edged, and it was kind of hovering there, and then it went to the side of the windshield and all the way to the other side and came back and looked at me. I mean, it did that a couple of times, then stopped, looked at me again, and I'm getting a real sense of intelligence. No real messages or anything.
Right.
Then it darts forward and goes up, and that's all I remember. I don't remember driving home. In fact, get this, Dana, I didn't remember the sighting at all. Did not remember it until months later. It
Yeah.
completely left my mind, which, having interviewed a lot of people by this point, 50 or 100, even way back then.
Yeah.
Now it's hundreds upon hundreds.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
had an experience like that. I was on my way to work. I was working nights. I had to leave the house around 1 o'clock or so in the morning, and I remember locking the door. Next thing I remember was walking around and talking to the guys at work. I don't remember turning around from locking the door, walking out to the street to get in my car, driving 30 miles with several turns, parking the car at work, walking into the building, punching in, having a meeting that we had every morning. But then I remember talking to the guys after the meeting. So
were
yeah,
you
I've
late?
had, huh?
Were you late? Did you have,
No, I wasn't
time?
late. I was there on time. Everything was as normal when I came to again. Um, but that kind of goes with my trip that I just recently took, and found out that was a possible messaging that they were doing. They either, trying to remember what she was saying, but they were giving me messages, they were giving me information, something along this line, and I'm just not to remember it yet because I don't remember. And I had
I was
several times
surprised.
driving like that.
Yeah, I think I
Okay.
had missing time. I really do. Having interviewed people who had this kind of experience, I never quite understood how you can forget such an incredible event.
Right.
But now I get it because it happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that year turned out to be a very big year for me. I had a number of sightings. It was like a month later, we'd taken a family vacation up to Northern California, Crater Lake, Mount Shasta.
Okay.
And I was staying, everyone went to sleep except for me, Mark, and Christy. We wanted to see UFOs and we were going to stay up late. And we did. And mind you, we were surrounded by very tall sequoia trees. So you couldn't really, there was just a tiny circle of sky above us. But it was brilliant. Cut
Mm-hmm.
stars, beautiful starscape,
Mm-hmm.
no city lights. And Mark shouts out, I saw something. And Chris and I look at him and look up. And we're like,
Right.
where? He's like, right there, give me the flashlight. we had brought this big flashlight to try to, call down UFOs.
Yes, yes.
And he flashed this flashlight up in the sky, and I couldn't believe my eyes when this light came on and flashed back at us. Went out. And Christy's like, flash it again, flash it twice this time. And he flashed it twice, and this object flashed twice back at us.
Oh, sweet.
It was amazing. I was like jumping up and down because I know my astronomy. By this point, I know my astronomy. There's
Right.
and my aircraft, right? Because I studied. This is a subject that really demands that. And so I know this is not a satellite. I've seen many satellites in my day, and this was not a helicopter or a balloon or any of those things that you would, go to explain this. I don't know what it was other than a UFO. And when I say UFO, I mean ET craft. That's
Right.
what I think it was. Again, I can't prove it. It was a light. But came back to LA, joined a group called CSETI, the Center for Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where you basically do meditation to call down UFOs.
Yeah.
We had this little group, a core group of about 10 of us, because it started out larger, 20 people. But we had a sighting on the first night we went out. Second night, and then for 5 years or so, we would have sightings of anomalous lights pretty much exclusively. Every, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. But yeah, the sightings started to add up. So I wasn't thinking of myself as a contactee by any means.
Right.
But I'm like, wow, they are real. I know it. I'm not a UFO believer. I'm a UFO knower. I know this is real. And so that's, bit by bit, this is a subject that took over my life in a good way.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds so
I enjoyed
exciting.
it.
Yeah.
I'm still working full time, mind you, because what I did was I started writing articles for magazines and journals, and I started speaking on the radio. And to my shock, going on TV, never expected to ever do that. I'm a shy guy, started speaking at conventions, getting asked to speak. So I'm like, wow, I can't believe this is happening.
That's awesome.
And I wrote about 30 articles and investigated for 10 years, from 1986 to 1996. And then at some point, I met this contactee who had had a healing. She had had a cyst removed. She had was diagnosed with a cyst that was causing her problems in her fallopian tubes and had to have surgery. And the night before surgery, she had an encounter. She's like, this is weird. I'm supposed to go to the doctor tomorrow, and this is happening. So she went to the doctor, and they did pre-op imaging to make sure that everything was good. And they got angry with her a little bit. They said, you went to a doctor, didn't you? You had your cyst removed. She's like, no, I didn't. What are you talking about? She's thinking, oh my gosh,
Right.
this encounter. And they said, well, we know you did because, here's your x-rays. There's fluid here. It's only present if you've had surgery. This doesn't make sense. And she played dumb. She didn't tell them, oh, ETs came. I asked her, I'm like, why didn't you just tell them? She's like, are you kidding me? I didn't want the men in white coats to come, take away to a psych hospital.
Right, right.
Which, sounds funny, but it's not. I've talked to people who actually were institutionalized by their own family.
Yeah.
I mean, one lady in England, she had an encounter with another gentleman who confirmed it. Family didn't care. She had a young baby, and they thought she had lost her mind.
Oh, no.
Baby was in danger, blah, blah, blah. And they institutionalized her. Another guy interviewed almost had the same thing happen, but he fought back. He's like, you are not institutionalizing me.
No.
So yeah, it's a real danger.
Yeah.
And that's, gosh, this subject is being portrayed in a very fear-based way. A lot of the books and articles I was reading were, oh, it's scary. People are being taken on board and experimented on, and these bug-like aliens, they got no emotions, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh gosh, this is not quite the kinds of cases I'm getting.
No.
So I'm like a little confused at this point.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm going to write another article because I knew at this point, this was not a nefarious thing. And And I thought, I know of other healing cases. No one's talking about this. I knew of a doctor in France, case by Jacques Vallée. This doctor was struck by a beam of light and it healed his partial paralysis from injuries during a war wound. And he had cut his foot with an axe and had this gouge on his ankle. And struck by a beam of light, and both of those things were healed. And I knew of another case of a Peruvian customs official who was healed of rheumatism and nearsightedness after being struck by a beam of light from a UFO. I knew another case involving a police officer struck by a beam of light, cured him of a flesh wound on his finger. So I'm like, wow, this would be a good article. And I started looking at those cases, and then I found another and another and another. And I ended up finding like 30, 40 cases. I'm like, I can't write an article, I have to write a book. So that became my first book, which I had never really intended to do.
And by the way, I have all your books and all your information in the comments below. So check that out, everyone, of all of his books and all of his information and contacts. So if you have any stories or anything like that, yeah, get a hold of them.
Meanwhile, I'm still seeing UFOs every now and then.
Yeah.
I'm seeing them. So I felt like the phenomena, I hate that word, but the UFOs and ETs were kind of circling around me. I'm circling around them. And, I never really, again, thought of myself as being a contactee. But when the sightings start adding up, and when there starts to be an interaction there, you realize, well, I'm having the same kinds of experiences people are describing. Because I'm dreaming now about UFOs and ETs and being on board.
Yeah.
So it was just getting more and more exciting. In that healing book.
So have you been connected with the same ones more than once, or are these all different ones, all different beings?
I would not really tell you, because most of my encounters have been sightings. Not all. I mean, there was, after interviewing that lady who was healed, she was describing all of her experiences, and I'm transcribing the interview. This is mid-1990s. And I'm like, gosh, is this lady for real? I knew her. I knew her well. I still know her. She's a very nice lady. And it was clear to me her experiences were real, but she was describing hybrid babies. I mean, she was describing being taken on board and all these things that her case was very extensive. And it was hard for me to wrap my head around. And so one night I'm transcribing the interviews with her and I'm leaning back in my chair thinking, she described having grays pop up around her bed, and she reached out and kicked one, and its neck snapped. I'm like, oh my gosh, I now know of several cases like this, but at the time I didn't. I knew of one or two. But gosh, this is a lot. So I'm leaning back in my chair when I got this really powerful impulse to just go on the roof, go on the roof, go on the roof. I lived in a 3-story condo. I'm like, I'm not allowed on the roof. It's off limits. I know the way there. I had an upper level end unit, so I could get there easily. Finally, I'm like, I'm just going to go up on the roof. This is the middle of the night. This is not something I would ever do, have ever done.
Right.
And even weirder, I grabbed my glasses. I'm slightly nearsighted. I used them for driving. They were in the car, 3 stories down. I went 3 stories down. This is a secure building. I had to get my keys. Pull them out of the car, go back up, and climb onto the roof. And so I had perfect vision at this point, corrected. And no sooner was I up there, not more than a minute, it was 20 or 30 seconds when a UFO appeared. And it was across the street. It was at treetop level, right above the apartment building, over the LA River. And it blasted me with a message. It said, it's us. We're her ETs. We're real, And this was not English. This was just a knowing. It was a download. It was a communication, which was very clear.
Right.
And then they darted around a little bit to prove in my mind. This is, the motive
Yeah.
and disappeared. I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
That
So
is really cool.
that was
Yeah.
communication. Right?
Yeah.
And it was not far after that I'm in my room one day.
Hmm.
And
We're kind of coming up to the end of our time here, so just wanted to give you a heads up there. So.
all right, I'll be quick. I was in my room sleeping, right? But I'm doing lucid dreaming and out of body experiences. So I was
Hmm.
kind of awake and asleep at the same time.
Uh,
It's hard to describe, but you can kind of have a sense of what's around you, even though you're asleep. And suddenly I woke up, full on woke up, because I felt what I thought was a cat walking across my bed. I don't have a cat. I don't have a cat. So I'm like, what is going on?
yeah.
And I opened my eyes and I could have sworn I saw somebody standing next to my bed. I sleep in pitch darkness. I don't like light when I'm sleeping. So I couldn't really see that well. But whatever it was rail thin. And I'm looking at it and thinking, gosh, is that a person? When the darn thing darts out, moving faster than a person can move, out of my bedroom and into the living room and around the corner, my heart started thumping and I turned over and went back to bed. I'm like, I'm just going back to bed,
Yeah.
which is an odd reaction, but this is something that happens
Hmm.
with contactees. So yeah, I started to realize I am having experiences.
Yeah, that is so cool, and I've had experiences similar to that too, with them being next to my bed and all. I had 6 in my room, and so yeah, we still have more to talk about, Preston. But let's talk offside, off the camera and everything, and let's get some more information. I'd love to talk to you some more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show again, and I'm sure we can talk. Oh, we just saw something fly up on your screen there from the bottom
Really?
going up. I'll have to relook at that. Um, but thank you for being on the show. I so appreciate it, and I know we have so much more to talk about. Um, I want to hear so much more of your stories and all. But again, if anybody out there has any stories and has experienced anything like that, contact me at Gmail, or I'm sorry, lifetalk423@gmail.com. And even at that, contact Preston and let him know your stories, because he still wants all those stories for himself too. So let's go ahead and end right here. And thank you everyone for joining us again. And thank you, Preston, for joining us again. And we'll see everybody next week. Bye.